I thought I would share today a little bit about just getting back from New York City, Manhattan, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama was teaching there for the last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and this was held at the Beacon Theater, which Venerable Simpke and I had been to before, which is a really interesting setting because it's small, which is very nice. I think it's under 3,000 people, and it's what's the word for that? Greco-Roman. I don't know. It has the most interesting interior. So you have to imagine His Holiness on this kind of, they have him on this kind of throne with all the color, and then there's all these monastics from different traditions, mostly Tibetan, but a few other traditions, all this color on the stage, and then around all that are these, like, to me they seem like 2-story tall, like Greek soldiers with their, it's just like, it's very ornate, and it's really I like it because it's so small, but I really think it's a very interesting theater too. So, and His Holiness had been traveling a lot. You couldn't tell at all. He had just been at Emory University in Atlanta and then gone to Mexico City and then there, and he was as fresh and energetic as ever. His 2 attendants looked completely wiped out. I don't know how he does it. But I wanted to share a couple other things that he said and then a little bit of other things about the trip. The teachings were on emptiness, so I probably won't share anything about that part, except for that, they were spectacular teachings. And Richard Gere, who was one of the sponsors, made a comment at the end when he was thanking him for coming that these were, for him had been like some of the deepest teachings he'd ever heard on the topic. And that was a pleasure to have him there. He's a very sincere student, and it shows, and it's just very inspiring to be around people who are so sincere, which is another big part of the trip for me. The person we stayed with was a very sincere new person to the Dharma. But one of the first things that His Holiness said that, it was way early, and it really stuck with me, and the people I was with as well mentioned it. He just said, I never think of myself as the Dalai Lama. And then he went on to proceed to say why. And he said, if I think of myself as the Dalai Lama, then right away I create this separation. And right away it becomes like, I'm this and they're that, and is this feeling of separation, and then it adds this kind of separation to the relationship, and then it leads to some kind of loneliness even, and things like that. And it was just, I don't know, I thought it was very skillful and also very insightful. And one of his great things that he can teach us is about his kind-heartedness and his just openness and friendliness. And so in many ways it's obvious that he has cultivated this, because even as he himself explained, like on the very that was one of the first things he said. One of the very last things on the last day that he said during the public talk, he was talking about how nice it is to be around people when they're friendly and open, and then how hard it is to have that same kind of welcoming feeling inside when people are kind of shut down, and he says, and I experience that too. We always think he's above all of this, but it's very clear from what he says that he goes through the same things that all of us go through, but he's actually just always finding ways to work with the mind, and it's at such a level that his the afflictions hardly even manifest. If you've heard him speak many times, he always talks about, I got a little angry when I was about 8 years old, about something really small, where the rest of us are like everyday occurrence, So, and he's of course just telling his experience as it is, and so it gives us, for me, always a great sense of hope, seeing him modeling the fruition of the teachings as best as I can take it in and understand, but the modeling is actually very helpful. And where I was sitting this time was, I don't sit on the floor too easily, so I was sitting in a chair, and the stage was quite crowded, so we were, luckily for me, I was way off to the side, like behind a curtain. And so I actually was great because I was right next to where they came in and left every day. So the very first day I was able to, make kind of a connection, and I learned a lot from that. Just that feeling of openness is something I experienced with Venerable Chödrön too, and I think this is something in the training that experience helps me to, gives me a modeling of, I know what that feels like inside. Like there's no barriers. There's this kind of feeling of appropriate trust and appropriate respect, appropriate kindness, all these ways that all comes together in a moment, kind of an openness and everything. And so that was a very good experience for me of kind of feeling that from him, feeling it in myself, and then, trying to remember that and how, this is one way that would be really nice to be able to go through the world and interact with people. And how you get to that is through just practicing, following the teachings, especially the teachings on bodhicitta, of course, have to be there, and warm-heartedness and all the ways that we can bring that about. But I think that from what he made very clear from the teachings, bodhicitta is the core of his practice. Bodhicitta also includes besides the conventional, the ultimate bodhicitta, which is the wisdom of emptiness, really, the teachings on emptiness. And that is such a great tool. So as, the best we can, this was what I felt was quite emphasized in these teachings, although the teachings were mostly on like the Heart Sutra and the wisdom texts, the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines. He spent half a day on that, which wasn't even in the plans, but he wanted to do that. And then he's started teaching from the wisdom chapter of Shantideva. But within that, he always combined the philosophical emptiness teachings with bodhicitta and this, idea of really combining these things and combining them in your practice. And he was very explicit about that and very clear. And just to close, one of the things, I think this was more for the monks who speak Tibetan, but it's really true for all of us. It's just that we don't have all the texts that they have. But he made a very strong point of the Kangyur and the Tengyur, the Buddha's teachings and the commentaries on them that is in the Tibetan canon, essentially the Tibetan canon. It's not something that you have in your temple to be worshipped. Of course, it's there and it is very inspiring, but they're actually to be read and practiced on a daily basis. And he made that point a few times. In fact, he made it in a few ways. He was talking about how the Tibetan canon has about 320 texts, of which 15 to 20 come from China and the rest come from India. And when he came back around on this a few times and he always was like, and these are there to be practiced. You should be reading these texts and practicing them. And another big distinction he made, actually this is worth sharing, because I thought it was a really good piece of guidance for us, is that in the Tibetan tradition, and this may be true in others, but it's definitely true there's like two main classes of, I think the way he set it up was maybe text, but I think it also meant practitioners in a way. But if you talk about it in terms of text, one are these scholarly texts that are very general, even the classical treatises, and they lay out the whole basis of the path. And they were written for a public audience, for a large audience, and they lay out the teachings very fully and completely. Then you have this other whole class of teachings that were actually teachings that were given to single or small groups of students, which were written for people with certain particular dispositions, physiologies, and all kinds of things. And he said it would be a mistake to, in a sense, to give precedence to those texts, because you have to give precedence to the ones that are the general ones that cover the whole path. And he said, in fact, of the two, if you were to keep the teachings of the pretty much how I would read it, the Lam Rim and the classical treaties, basically what lays out the path, and then these classical texts. And then people study those, these other texts would naturally evolve because they're based on that. But if you only had the texts that the yogis wrote and you didn't have what showed the whole path, those texts would be limited because they were written for specific small numbers of people. And so I think this really gave a good piece of guidance to us as practitioners too, and how to, think about how we, where we are in our practice, how we use our time, and how we take in the different material that we have available to us. So I can't think of anything else.